Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Fertility Confidence Podcast. Today, I have a wonderful interview with Mel Angus from TempDrop for you. We are going to talk all things cycle charting. She shared some really great insights into how to get this into your routine, and also what are some things we can actually learn from cycle tracking that goes beyond just making a baby. And a lot of times I find women will be discouraged from cycle tracking because they feel it's complicated or there's a lot of rules, or they're doing it, but they actually have no idea what any of it means, which understandably so. It can take some getting used to in terms of how to interpret and read your chart and knowing, but there's so much wonderful, wonderful things we can learn about your body. And Mel and I had a really great conversation around what some of those things are, not just through the fertility journey, but beyond that as well. So I love, in fertility confidence method, we don't talk a lot about what we're gaining outside of the fertility space. When women come in and work with me, we've got our mind fixated on that one goal. But the beautiful piece of all the things we learn together is that we're setting you up for a future of balanced lifestyle and happy hormones, and being able to advocate and support yourself when something is off, and knowing what to ask for, and having the data and the tracking to say like, something's different here. So as much as we obviously want to explore this tool when it comes to ovulation tracking and timing intercourse and making a baby, the reality is that there's actually so much more to that. So Mel was a wonderful, wonderful guest. I hope you guys love the episode. If you haven't already grabbed your TempDrop, which we're going to talk about and you'll hear about in the episode, it's something that I personally use for my cycle tracking, and quite literally the only way I could cycle track right now. Honestly, I would never be able to oral temp if my life depended on it at this point. So TempDrop has made it super, super simple for me. So if you're someone who has struggled with the rules of temping before, if you're someone who doesn't get a good restful sleep, if you're someone who works shift work, if you have kids at home and they're keeping you up at night, or maybe your partner is a snorer and he keeps you up at night, whatever has you having maybe disrupted sleep, which is a whole other topic for another time we should talk about, or you're just really struggling with remembering to take your temperature or being consistent with the habit overall, a TempDrop is something that can just change the game for you. So if you haven't already grabbed your TempDrop, you can do so using the code KELSEYTD. And I'm going to pop that in the show notes for you as well. And you'll actually be able to get 12% off. And if TempDrop is running one of their wonderful, amazing sales, then you can throw that coupon code right on top of that sale price as well. So that code's KELSEYTD, the link for TempDrop, and the code will be in the show notes for you. And I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, Mel. Welcome to the Fertility Confidence Podcast.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here and just speak to you all.
Why don't you take a second and just tell us a little bit about you before we get into all the wonderful things about cycle tracking and TempDrop?
No problem. So I'm a little bit obsessed with cycle tracking after I found it a bit over 7 years ago. My personal story is I was looking for an alternative to hormonal birth control, which I'd been on for a very long time as someone who had chosen not to have children. And yeah, got to this point in my life in my 30s, and I was like, this can't be good for me. What else is out there? And for the first time, I searched for natural birth control and discovered fertility tracking. So I quickly, I'm a real researcher, so I went deep with research and changed over. And yeah, it was a point that really changed my life. And when I say changed my life, I mean my whole well-being and especially my mental health changed just in ways that I could not have ever imagined. And so then I went and, down the rabbit hole of what happened, what was going on. And that's when I discovered the link between cycle health, whole well-being and mental health. And from then on, yeah, I've just become obsessed because it really did help me so much. And then a couple of years into my journey, TempDrop, the device came along, which we'll speak a little bit more about later. And I was able to join the team. And it's been an amazing thing to be part of a company that's, trying to lead the way in helping more women to be able to track their cycles. And
Hmm.
yeah, so this has brought me to this space, and I've also been certified as a fertility awareness instructor as well.
Amazing. I love that you share a little bit about your personal journey being, even different from the women that are likely listening to this, but I so often remind them that cycle tracking and learning these tools and doing this isn't just about making the baby, but we can actually learn so much about your health and your hormones from really tuning in and understanding your cycle a little bit better.
Yeah, for sure. And that's where I think many of us who find ourselves discovering this knowledge, I don't know about others, but personally, I felt very almost betrayed that,
Mhm.
we didn't know, we weren't taught this. And I was one that believed that my cycle was only for making babies. And, that's all it pertained to. But after discovering cycle tracking, I realized it's so much more. And again, it's a message like you for those trying to conceive. Go into this journey with eyes wide open that this can be something that can be with you right through the rest of your reproductive life.
Totally. What are some of those things that cycle tracking can teach us that people might not be thinking of when they're really focused on just having a baby?
Mm, yes. Well, it can be an insight into our endocrine system because, our cycle, that whole cycle process starts from our brain, from our pituitary gland and our hypothalamus, and these have an effect on so much more in our body. These are the organs that help with thyroid processes, that help with adrenal processes, with all of those processes within the endocrine system, everything that runs on our hormones. So that's reflected in our cycle. We are very fortunate as women to have something that we can physically watch at home that gives us that insight into how our endocrine system is functioning. And of course, hormones then reflect on how well our mental health is doing. So, this is the difference. This is what we can see. So, how our cycle health is a reflection of how all those other hormones are functioning within our bodies.
Hmm. Can you give us like a quick 2-minute crash course on when you say cycle tracking, what do you actually mean by that?
Sure. So tracking or charting daily our primary fertility signs. And our primary fertility signs include our basal body temperature or a nightly sleeping temperature, our cervical fluid, and other symptoms such as LH testing, um, you know, cervical position, those kind of things can be tracked as well. So we put those symptoms together on a chart every single day, and then we are actually tracking ovulation. So it's more than period tracking. It's more than tracking bleeding events.
Hmm.
It's tracking ovulation because ovulation is the key to a successful cycle, and it's also a key to the changing of hormones that happens within our cycle. So yeah, so it's just tracking those symptoms to identify if and when we are ovulating.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like I get a lot of times asking these questions, and women are like, "Oh yeah, I get my period every however many weeks, and I bleed for 3 days." And I'm like, "Well, that's not cycle tracking to me in my world," but it's still like what we think of, what so many people think of. Cycle tracking actually just is like day one of my bleed, I'm done. But there's just so much more once we get into the nitty gritty. And speaking of the nitty gritty, one of the pieces that I get pushback on, I feel, not necessarily from my clients, but maybe just more so from my broader community, is like how complicated it can feel. How do you help women remove that sort of limiting belief of cycle tracking?
Well, number one and foremost, grab a TempDrop.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to plug TempDrop here because obviously that's going to take the stress out
Totally
of
agree.
perhaps capturing that nightly sleeping temperature first and foremost. I mean, that's probably one of the more difficult things to do consistently.
Hmm.
And the reason why is traditionally, if we wanted to capture a basal body temperature, we would have to capture a waking temperature, which means sticking a thermometer in your mouth um, upon waking, which typically is early in the morning. You may have to set an alarm if you're not a consistent waker at a consistent time. And who has the brain capacity among everything else on your journey to be worrying about waking at a certain time every single morning and taking this temperature? It's
Hmm.
it's challenging to keep up over
Yeah.
time. So first and foremost, TempDrop takes that stress away. Here's something that you can just wear at night. It captures the temperature for you, and you've got that piece of the puzzle straight away. And that's not a difficult thing to do. And then secondly, especially when trying to conceive, we know that cervical fluid or cervical mucus plays such a big role in that. So if you can just consciously, each time you use the bathroom, think about what you're feeling when you're wiping. Like, this is the very basics. We're not going
Yeah.
too deep here, but just do that, because over time and just with a little bit of practice, no doubt you will note when it's more slippery to wipe. And
Hmm.
then, look, now I've got fertile type mucus, peak type mucus. So
Hmm.
even if you, at a bare minimum, just put that on the chart with your temperatures, now you're starting to fill the picture in, and you've got something to go by in reviewing that. So it's just a matter of starting. Just
Yeah.
jump in and start, and then it's amazing how much it can become second nature once you see the benefit, and once you can use those charts to start
Yeah.
evaluating what's going on.
Yeah. I always tell people that if you go to the bathroom, you can cycle track. And if you aren't going to the bathroom, we have a bigger problem. We
This is
probably
true.
need to work on that first.
Yes.
And then, but
Absolutely.
it's so true. It does totally become second nature because I I started doing this probably 10 years ago, maybe 11. And I oral temped for many, many, many years. And prior to conceiving my son, and my now husband like would make fun of me all everywhere we went. I brought my little pink thermometer with me, like tucked it under my pillow, and I had to set an alarm, and it was something I was committed to doing. And after I had Cole, it became basically impossible. He did not sleep. I did not sleep. I was up at all hours of the day, at night. And when we wanted to start trying for our second, I was like, well, what am I going to do? Because this is what worked the first time. I don't really have that same data. I don't know what's going on in my body. And that's actually how I found TempDrop. And I had never heard of it. I had never seen it. And it was probably very close to when it was like just emerging in the market. And I was like, well, I'm going to give this a try. And I will never go back. Like, it was just such a game changer. And especially for after Nyla was born, my second, and being able to just actually continue to throw it on and know and expect my first postpartum period and know when my body started ovulating again and not have to deal with the oral temping. And it was just such a nice tool to have that now, even though I'm out of my fertility journey and on the other side, I still wear my TempDrop because it still gives me that peace of mind of like what's happening with my cycle. And I can see how stress is impacting that and know when I need to pull back. And I know when I'm pushing myself too hard because I'm seeing it in my temperatures and my luteal phase. And this comes after years and years and years of tracking. So having that consistent data, even if it feels hard at the beginning, is just going to open the door for you in later years as well.
Yes, that's right. And then, you mentioned later years. What about when we enter that perimenopause phase of our
Mm-hmm.
life? How
Mm-hmm.
many end up totally in the dark, thinking, oh, my
Totally.
periods have stopped, and then boom, you have this random bleed again. You may not know if that bleed is a true menstruation or is it a breakthrough bleed, what's happening in your body. So
Yeah.
if we can keep that consistency of charting up right through to the point where we know we're in menopause, well, you're just in such a better position to advocate for your health and know, is this perimenopause or is there something else going on that's impacting my cycles?
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I have a very small private practice still, and some clients that have been with me for years and years that aren't fertility related. And just in the last probably like 6 weeks, I've had two of them start cycle tracking and have them grab a TempDrop. And they're like, but I'm not trying to get pregnant. I'm like, but we need to know what is going on so that I know what blood work to run, how we're going to move on from here. Like, for exactly that reason, are we having breakthrough bleeding? Are you ovulating? Are you not ovulating? Like, all of these are just such big pieces of the puzzle that actually help us to understand the root cause of some of the issues that you may entail down the line. So there's so much benefit to it beyond just that fertility piece, which is really cool.
Absolutely. It's amazing.
What are some, like, I really wanted to pick your brain about funky cycle charts because we see them all the time in fertility
Yes.
confidence method, and people will bring me their charts and I'm like, oh, give me one more cycle and let's see like if this is going to be a trend or if this is just a one-off that we can kind of like squirrel in the bank of uh-oh, let's hope that doesn't happen again. But what are some interesting things that you can see in a chart that might lead us to further investigation?
Mm. So maybe a big one, an obvious one, is when we have a long irregular cycle. So, somebody's charting and we're not seeing evidence that ovulation has been successful, but we can see evidence that perhaps if they're tracking cervical mucus or LH or
Mm-hmm.
both, we might see evidence of multiple ovulation attempts. And this is where it can get confusing, especially if you're
Yeah.
just tracking one symptom.
Yeah.
You may see, for those that may not be aware, we are looking for peak type, or we often refer to it raw egg white type mucus that is more moisture laden, as a sign that our body is attempting to ovulate. We also look, if you're tracking LH, a positive LH test, as a sign that your body is trying to ovulate. But then this is where temperatures come in. These can be the the sign that helps us understand if that ovulation attempt was successful. Because just because we see peak type mucus or see an LH test turn positive, that's not a guarantee this ovulation attempt will be successful. Sometimes it just
Mm-hmm.
doesn't come off. And so if we have this long chart and this is what we can see in it, we can see multiple patches perhaps of peak type cervical mucus or multiple positive LH tests at different times through the chart, but no confirmation of ovulation. Well,
Mm-hmm.
now we know that, things just aren't signaling each other properly. Something's wrong. Something's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we've been charting over a course of time, the awesome thing is if we have that history, like you said, is it just a one-off, or can we see something in the prior cycles that give us an indication of what might be happening in this cycle?
Right.
Recently, I saw one of one of our users, because I'm like you, I see many atypical chart patterns in our Facebook community group, because that's usually when someone asks a question, what's going
Right.
on? It's not
Yeah.
looking right. And recently there was one where she typically had fairly regular cycles and then this great long one. And I asked some questions, and she she had had a change of medication, and so it's like, oh, okay, something different
Mm-hmm.
has happened here.
Yeah.
So yeah, we look for long irregular cycles as a sign that things aren't functioning well. Another thing we can look for is the time from ovulation to end of cycle is our luteal phase. We should have a reasonable length luteal phase as a sign of a healthy cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So typically we look for, depending on our viewpoint, but typically we will look for a luteal phase of around about 12 days, anything sort of between 10 and 16, depending on how we're counting that. So if we see short luteal phase over a couple of cycles, then this could give us an indication that, hey, there might be a progesterone problem, that our ovulation event is not very robust. And
Mm-hmm.
so if we have that progesterone issue when trying to conceive, it's very vital, because without progesterone, implantation will be unsuccessful. But also just in general health, progesterone is a wonder hormone. We
Mm-hmm.
need that progesterone hit to offset the effects of estrogenic load. Like, estrogen is great. We need it in its time, but if we kind of have too much of that over time without the pushback of the progesterone has that kind of balancing effect
Mm-hmm.
against estrogen. And so, yeah, if we don't have enough of that often enough, that can cause all sorts of problems health wise, and also on our conception journey, if that's our journey. So,
Right.
those are a couple of things. Other extra things we can do is chart other symptoms such as PMS, such as headaches, if we're someone prone to migraines, for example, um, even the way we're feeling, our mood. And if we do that over time on our chart, like a little mini diary, we may be able to connect that to the change in hormones. Is it happening around ovulation? Is it happening during the luteal phase? Well, these are now signs that these are connected to our cycle hormones. So it's cyclic.
Mm-hmm.
And when we have that insight, then we can start to target, okay, I need to balance something out, or, I need to change my lifestyle around this part of my cycle in order to cope better, if that's the case.
Yeah. What I had this question in my office hours this morning, and I always have my same sort of standard answer, but is there anything negative about your temperature staying high and decreasing while you bleed versus decreasing and then getting a bleed?
I personally, I've not, people have different individual patterns.
Yeah.
There were, there was a very, very old study on women with endometriosis and the pattern of the way the temperature falls at the end of the cycle, whether it falls into the new cycle. But that was quite old and very inconclusive, really. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we have so much better technology these days. It'd be wonderful if it could be done again. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But I mean, if we're matching the temperatures to the hormone change, then we would conclude that the progesterone is dropping off more slowly than a sharp drop, a sharp change between the progesterone
Right.
and the estrogen. Um, and for some people, they may even note that if there is that really sharp drop, perhaps their period is a little bit more symptomatic in terms of
Mm-hmm.
heaviness or cramping. Whereas if it's more gradual, they might notice, oh, my period is actually a better period. So,
Right.
again, it's something that you can note within yourself, your individual patterns.
Yeah.
How does this have an effect on me? And could it be indicating that changeover is just more rapid than what it could be?
Yeah. That's kind of how I've been describing it. So that's good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm someone that kind of flip-flops. Some cycles I drop and start a bleed, and some cycles I drop during my bleed. And I'm going to go back now. It'd be interesting for me to see if my actual flow is different
Yes.
compared in those cycles, because I never really thought of actually comparing that marker with, it was, for me, it was always just, it's just a personal kind of like trend, and it doesn't really tell us a whole lot. As long as it comes down, that's what I'm more worried about,
Mm.
concerned
I
about. So I'll go back and look.
Yeah, have a look and take note, because personally, I feel like I have noted personally that when I have a really sharp drop and then my bleed starts, I have a worse period, or even a migraine, a menstrual migraine
Yeah.
comes
Yeah.
with that. Um, that's something I've noticed when I've kind of not been taking care of myself
Yeah.
more so, the menstrual migraines. But I have noted that really big drop and then just having not the greatest time
Right.
on my period.
Yeah, this is what's so good about taking the time to put your symptoms in your chart, because you will likely, for a lot of these things, see trends, and maybe not every cycle, but with consistency, we will be able to start to pick apart and say, okay, around ovulation, this is what's going on. Around my period, this is what's going on. And now we can take that and apply it to what does this mean for fertility and dig deeper into some of those investigations.
That's right. And just again, reiterating the importance of consistency with tracking our symptoms. Now, this is maybe something, I don't know, you may have done when you're oral temping, and I certainly did, is I fell into the habit of what they call shortcut charting over time. And that meant stopping my temperature taking after I confirmed ovulation. And also not temping during my period at the beginning
Yeah.
and the end, just putting enough temperatures on the chart to confirm
Just
ovulation.
like a little middle chunk.
Yeah, I know. I look back on those charts now and go, oh my word, I was just so slack. Um, but what I noticed with once I got my temp drop is now it was easy, so I just kept it up. And it's best to use temp drop all cycle for the technology side. But now I have years and years of full
Yeah.
charts right to the end. And it's like we've been talking about these end temperatures can give us some insight. So that's an amazing thing about just having a tool that makes it so easy is you can get that full chart of data cycle after cycle, which then if you're taking to a healthcare practitioner or you're just analyzing for yourself, if you're learning your patterns, you can see those trends.
Yeah. Tell us about the temp drop technology because it is so fascinating how it works.
So TempDrop is a wearable sensor, thermometer sensor, and it also includes a charting app for those who wish to use the charting feature within the app. But the main technology is this TempDrop sensor, which you wear on your upper arm, just below the armpit, over the axillary artery area, in a band. You pop it on before sleep, wear it all night. When you're up from the day, just remove it. Easy done. And then when you're ready, you can sync it to the app, and that pulls the data from the sensor and gives you a nightly sleeping temperature. So it seems simple, but it's actually quite smart technology because it's taking a reading every 12 and a half seconds all night long, thousands of data points, which then run through the temperature filtering algorithm and, filter out disturbances such as when you're awake or when there's change in environment temperature, those kind of disturbances that typically make it difficult to get a skin temperature, an accurate skin temperature. So that does its magic and then pulls out a nightly sleeping temperature based on that night's data and also your historical data. So it just keeps using, so it's learning your personal patterns and environment and sleeping habits and all that as well, and gives you that nightly sleeping temperature. So you sync it you've got your temperature either in a list form or you can pop over to the chart. So if you want to keep it all in one place and keep it easy, it's now loaded in the chart ready for you to add your other symptoms to that chart.
Right.
Yeah. So that's in a nutshell quite simple. That's what it is.
So it eliminates all of the rules, essentially. All you need to do is remember to turn it on, which
Remember to turn it on.
I have definitely worn it without turning it on my fair share of times. So you can still mess it up.
Get in the habit of
But
turning
it
it
makes the
on as you
morning
possibly can.
part significantly easier, which is great.
Yes. Because for those who may have not tried traditional temping, oral temping, it's, there is these variables that can make it inaccurate, such as not having consistent sleep before you take your temperature. So we like to see typically up to 3 hours of good solid sleep before you take the temperature. If you mouth breathe, for example, if you're tossing and turning, there's so many factors that can influence how that traditional waking temperature comes out. So temp drop just takes those pressures off. You don't have to worry about those things. If you're not a good sleeper, it's okay because it can find a time when you were asleep and pull a temperature for you. So
Yeah.
That's the difference. It just forget about the temperature taking aspect. Just put it on your arm and then sync it to the phone when it's ready. And I will say this is a very common question people ask is it transmitting while you're sleeping? No, it's not. does not connect to the phone until you manually sync it. So there's
Mhm.
no transmission signals. It runs on a simple coin cell battery, button battery.
Yeah.
That's what it's powered with. So it's just like wearing a traditional old watch
Yeah.
on your arm. So it just eliminates all that worry about, you know, EMFs and
EMFs. Yeah. Yeah,
Wi-Fi.
I get that question a lot too. What makes like auxiliary area temperature better than wrist?
Well, it's less prone to outside influences. Like just imagine your wrist in bed at night. Every time you move, there's going to be a lot more movement. There's a lot more
Right.
airflow over the wrist. Um, it's a little bit harder to keep a sensor nice and firm. Nice and um, protected. I'm trying to think of the word. That's not the word, but yeah, it's just more open to the influences of the
Right.
environment. Whereas auxiliary under your arm, I mean, taking a temperature under the arm is a very long held method, isn't it? With
Yeah.
babies
Yeah.
and you stick it under there. But this way you can get the length of time because it's taking so many temperatures readings overnight, you get the length of time that allows the filtering of all those variables.
Right. And I always remind people that basal body temperature means temperature at rest. So
Yes.
when we're taking our oral temperature, just by the act of having to reach over and grab your thermometer, you're no longer at rest. And our fingers and our wrists, there's definitely more prone to movement in those areas of our body versus something closer to our core. And so immediately when we're moving and shuffling around and awake, which we have to be to take our oral temperature, right there, we're no longer taking basal body temperature. And so with using something that's tracking through your sleep, like TempDrop is doing, we're getting a truer reading. So sometimes women will see a bit of a shift in their like general gradient of temperatures, I guess is a good way to describe it, from switching oral to temp drop. Either their temps sometimes are a bit lower or a bit higher than what they're used to, but that's okay as long as the pattern is still there and still consistent and we're able to see that. You will likely get a slightly different temperature because you're getting a more true at rest reading with the device versus the oral thermometer.
Correct. That's right. So you're measuring from a different part of your body, but you're also measuring at a different time.
Yeah.
And that's why there can be a difference. It's the same as, temping orally or vaginally. You don't expect both those readings to be exactly the same, but
Right.
you would expect the pattern over the course of the cycle to reveal that ovulation pattern, which is how it works with temp drop. And you're
Yeah.
right. And unfortunately, the term BBT, basal body temperature, has become synonymous with an oral waking temperature, but it,
Right.
it really isn't. Like you said, that's a waking temperature.
Yeah.
That's not a true BBT,
Right.
whereas a sleeping temperature is basal base resting temperature.
Yeah. When everything's shut down, your
Yeah,
body's not trying to do a whole heck of a lot in the middle of the night, hopefully.
hopefully.
Hopefully. This was awesome, Mel. There's so many great nuggets for everybody in here. So thank you so much. How I like to end all of our episodes is asking our guests for one piece of fertility advice that you'd like to leave for our listeners.
For me, it's just jump in and try ovulation tracking. Try
Mhm.
charting. Give it a go and give it time.
Yeah.
Just set a goal of getting at least temperatures on a chart for 3 months and then make a decision from there. But just jump in. Don't overthink it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, easier said than done to a bunch of
I
women
know.
who are trying
I
to get
know.
pregnant, but
Yeah.
I appreciate the sentiment for sure. But it's so true, I think, honestly, like I get I get asked all I when I run my boot camp, which I'm doing next week, our first day is all about cycle tracking. And all the time, like 50% of the women are like, "Oh, I've tried this before. It's really hard," or "I have no idea what I'm doing." And we always come back around and I share my journey with Temp Drop and how it literally changed the journey for me and charting and how simple it is. And the device is so simple to use. And it just takes all of the pressure off. So if you are one of those people listening and reading about charting and thinking it sounds complicated is one of the reasons why you haven't really fully stepped into that piece on your fertility journey, know that there are options out there to make it a little bit more simple for you. And I'll pop all that info in the show notes. So thanks, Mel, for joining me today. This was lovely, and hopefully we can chat again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kelsey. Appreciate it.